She had always seen Islam from a distance. To her, it was a religion built on rules, control, and male dominance. Every time she saw a woman in a hijab or niqab, she thought of words like oppression, silence, submission. She didn't hate Muslims, but she pitied the women. They don't know what real freedom is, she would say to herself. Raised in a world where liberation meant wearing what you want, saying what you want, and being whoever you want, she believed that Islam stood against everything women had fought for. So when she met a Muslim woman one day, bold in her faith, calm in her presence, and proud in her identity, she couldn't help but ask the question that had been sitting in her mind for years. Why would you follow a religion that oppresses women? What happened next was not a debate. It wasn't loud, aggressive, or defensive. The Muslim woman smiled, not in mockery, but in patience. She had heard this question before, not once or twice, but many times, and every time she welcomed it. Not because it was easy to answer, but because it was important. She looked at her and said softly, "What if I told you I've never felt more free, more honored, and more seen than I do as a Muslim?" That answer stopped her. It didn't make sense, at least not yet, but it didn't feel fake either. The Muslim woman wasn't hesitant. She wasn't forced. She wasn't apologizing for her religion. She was owning it with pride and serenity. There was no sadness in her eyes. There was strength. And that alone made her want to listen more. As they sat and spoke, the layers began to peel away. She learned that Islam gave women rights long before modern movements ever existed. That Muslim women owned businesses, ran empires, led communities, and raised generations of scholars. That the first believer in Islam was a woman. That the Quran speaks directly to both men and women with equal accountability and honor. This wasn't oppression, this was revelation. The hijab that once looked like a symbol of silence now appeared as a flag of dignity. It wasn't a burden, it was a choice. A bold statement in a world that constantly reduces women to appearances. My hijab tells the world I am more than my looks, the Muslim woman said. It's not about hiding, it's about protecting. It's not about being less, it's about being more than what society expects me to be. And suddenly, all the narratives she had been told began to crumble. Not because she lost an argument, but because she heard the truth from someone who lived it. A woman who was not oppressed, but empowered. Not silenced, but secure. Not hidden, but honored. She didn't need the world's definition of freedom, because she had something deeper. She had purpose. She had peace. She had God. That conversation didn't end with a conversion or a dramatic shift, but it did something greater. It opened her heart. It silenced the noise. It allowed her to see Islam through the eyes of a woman who wasn't just surviving, but thriving. And from that day on, she never saw Muslim women the same way again. She realized that the greatest oppression isn't in covering your body, it's in covering the truth. And the greatest freedom isn't in doing what everyone else does, it's in knowing who you are, who you belong to, and why you were created. That day, Islam spoke, not through arguments, but through a woman who carried it with grace. And that grace was louder than any words she had ever heard. She approached the conversation with confidence, armed with everything she thought she knew. Her belief that Islam oppressed women wasn't based on hatred, it was based on what she had seen, read, and been taught for years. The images of women in long black garments, the stories in the media, the cultural practices she assumed were part of the religion, they all shaped her view. So when she met a Muslim woman covered in a hijab, standing tall with grace and calmness, she couldn't resist asking, "Don't you feel oppressed?" She expected hesitation, maybe even discomfort, but what she saw instead was a gentle smile and peaceful eyes that didn't flinch. The Muslim woman didn't take offense. She welcomed the question as if it was something she had been waiting to answer, not to defend herself, but to clarify the truth. She said, "I wear this not because I'm forced to, but because I choose to. It's not a symbol of my weakness, it's a sign of my strength." That response was not what she had expected. It wasn't defensive, it was confident. And in that moment, her curiosity overpowered her assumption. The Muslim woman explained how Islam gave her the freedom to define herself, not by the eyes of society, but by the values of her Creator. She talked about modesty not as a prison, but as protection. She shared how the hijab was not a burden, but a shield. "It tells the world that I am more than my looks," she said. "It allows me to walk without being judged, without being consumed by pressure to meet beauty standards. I am respected for my mind, my soul, my purpose." What shocked her the most wasn't just the words. It was the way they were said. With pride, with certainty, and with a level of peace she had never associated with religion before. This woman was not brainwashed. She was not silent. She was not weak. She was a reflection of something deeper. Someone who knew exactly why she believed what she believed and loved every part of it. He came into the conversation expecting to find oppression, but instead she found a woman more empowered, more dignified, and more confident than many in the world that claimed to be free. And that realization quietly shook everything she thought she knew. She continued to listen, drawn in by the clarity and calmness of the Muslim woman's words. There was no bitterness in her tone, no defensiveness, only conviction. "The problem," the Muslim woman said softly, "is that people confuse culture with religion. What some people do in the name of Islam is not always Islam itself." That sentence struck her deeply. She had always assumed that the mistreatment of women in certain countries was a direct result of Islamic teachings. But now, for the first time, she was hearing a distinction she had never considered. Islam, as the Muslim woman explained, was not the enemy of women, it was their protection, their dignity, their strength. She was shown verses from the Quran that spoke directly to women, not as side characters, but as believers, as thinkers, as partners in faith and responsibility. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous of you. Quran 49 verse 13. There was no hierarchy based on gender in that verse, just a clear message that what mattered most was not appearance or status, but piety and character. She listened as the Muslim woman spoke about Khadija, the Prophet's wife, a wealthy businesswoman and the first believer in Islam. She heard about Aisha, a scholar and teacher whose narrations continue to shape Islamic knowledge to this day. The more she learned, the more she realized that her perception of Islam was shaped by voices that had never truly understood or represented it. She had been listening to critics, but not to Muslims. She had been observing practices, but not exploring scripture. "We are not oppressed," the Muslim woman said. "We are honored. But the world often fears what it doesn't understand." That line stayed with her long after the conversation ended. What impressed her most was how Islam viewed women not as objects, but as souls. Souls with rights, intellect, responsibility, and immense value. The Muslim woman spoke with such self-respect and clarity that it made her question her own understanding of freedom. Was freedom just doing whatever you wanted? Or was it living in alignment with a higher purpose, with honor and peace? And she came looking for flaws. But what she found was a faith that uplifted, protected, and dignified women in ways the world rarely showed. And that discovery left her speechless. She began to realize that her view of empowerment had been shaped entirely by external definitions. For so long, she thought liberation meant breaking every rule, dressing without limits, speaking without boundaries, and doing everything men did. But now, sitting across from a Muslim woman who chose modesty, humility, and obedience to her Creator, not out of fear, but out of deep conviction, she saw a different kind of strength, a quiet strength, a strength that didn't need validation from society, trends, or applause. My freedom, the Muslim woman said, isn't about being loud. It's about being clear in who I am. Those words stayed with her. The woman in front of her wasn't a victim of oppression. She was someone who had full control of her choices. She spoke with clarity, with purpose. She didn't feel pressured by fashion, social media, or shallow expectations. She wasn't reduced to her appearance. She wasn't exhausted trying to prove herself. Instead, she walked through life knowing exactly why she dressed the way she did. Instead, she walked through life knowing exactly why she dressed the way she did, why she prayed, why she submitted, not to society, not to men, but to Allah. The more she listened, the more the definitions began to shift inside her. She had once thought submission meant weakness, but now it looked like peace. She had once thought covering up meant shame, but now it looked like honor. She had once thought religious women were trapped, but now she saw that they were free from the pressure to please the world. And this kind of freedom wasn't loud or showy. It was deep, unshakable. He asked, "But don't you ever feel like you're missing out?" The Muslim woman smiled gently and said, "Not at all. I don't live for temporary attention. I live for eternal acceptance. That's what gives my life meaning." That sentence stopped her. It was something she had never thought about. Living not just for now, but for what comes after. That idea scared her, but it also humbled her. She started the conversation thinking she would challenge someone's faith, but she ended it reflecting on her own values. She didn't walk away with all the answers, but for the first time in her life, she knew she had been asking all the wrong questions. As the conversation continued, she asked about the hijab again, not just what it meant, but how it felt. "Doesn't it make you invisible?" she asked, genuinely curious. The Muslim woman didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled with calm pride and said, "The world teaches women that to be seen is to be valued. Islam teaches us that we are valuable even when we're not seen. My hijab doesn't make me invisible, it makes me protected. It tells the world I am not here to entertain, to attract, or to compete. I'm here to live with purpose and dignity." Those words settled into her mind like a quiet wave. She had never heard modesty described like that before. To her, the hijab had always looked like restriction, but now it sounded like power, real power, the kind that doesn't rely on how others perceive you, but on how you perceive yourself through your Creator's eyes. The Muslim woman explained that hijab isn't just a piece of cloth, it's a mindset, a constant reminder that she is more than just a body, that her worth is not determined by how many people admire her, but by how close she is to the one who created her. "I'm not covering because I'm ashamed," she said. "I'm covering because I am sacred." That sentence hit differently. Sacred, not silenced, not suppressed. Sacred. She reflected on her own life, always chasing perfection, always trying to fit in, always comparing herself with others. On social media, in public, even in her own mirror. The freedom she thought she had been living with suddenly felt like a burden she hadn't noticed. Constantly being looked at, judged, defined. Was that really freedom? Or was it another kind of cage, just a prettier one? The more the Muslim woman spoke, the more she realized that Islam wasn't asking women to hide. It was asking them to rise above shallow definitions of beauty, to rise above pressure, to rise above being reduced to image. And that kind of rise felt like real liberation. She had walked into the conversation thinking she'd meet someone who needed saving. Instead, she met someone who was already free. And for the first time in her life, she wondered if the freedom she had been chasing was actually waiting for her in the very place she never thought to look. She couldn't shake the feeling that had settled deep in her heart. The more she listened, the more she realized that everything she thought she knew about Islam and women was incomplete, maybe even wrong. The Muslim woman she spoke to wasn't weak, wasn't quiet, wasn't oppressed. She was bold, articulate, joyful, and strong in a way that didn't need attention or applause. There was something unshakable about her, a calm power that came from somewhere deeper than the world around her. And that power didn't come despite her religion. It came because of it. She had assumed that faith was a form of submission to men. But what she now saw was submission to God, not out of fear, but out of love, not out of guilt, but out of purpose. When I pray, the Muslim woman said softly, I'm standing in front of the one who created me, who sees me fully, who knows my worth even when the world doesn't. I don't need to prove myself to anyone else. That sentence stayed with her like an echo. She had spent so much of her life proving herself, her worth, her beauty, her strength. But this woman seemed free from that race, free from that noise. They spoke about obedience not as control, but as alignment with divine wisdom. Islam doesn't force me to obey men, she said. It commands men to protect and honor me. It places responsibility on them to serve, not dominate. It places value on me not based on my looks or status, but on my character and faith. These weren't the words of a woman who had been silenced. These were the words of someone who had been given a voice by something greater than society ever could. She began to understand that empowerment in Islam isn't about imitation, it's about recognition. Not about doing what men do, but about being honored for what women are. Islam didn't flatten gender, it celebrated it. It didn't compete, it complemented. And that view wasn't only logical, it was beautiful. She came with questions, maybe even doubts, but she left with something else entirely. A new lens, a softened heart, and a deep respect for a faith she once misunderstood. The more she opened her mind, the more she saw. Maybe Islam wasn't holding women back. Maybe it was lifting them up. Before she left, she asked one final question, not out of challenge, but out of genuine wonder. Why do you follow this so confidently, even when the world keeps judging you? The Muslim woman paused, then looked at her with a calm smile and said, because I know who I'm walking toward. I'm not here to impress the world. I'm here to please the one who gave me life. That answer struck something deep inside her. It wasn't dramatic or loud, but it was clear. This woman wasn't confused. She wasn't scared. She had direction. And that direction gave her a kind of peace no amount of worldly success could buy. She stood in silence for a moment, thinking about everything they had talked about. The things she had once mocked now made sense. The hijab that once looked like a barrier now looked like a shield. The religion she once called restrictive now looked like guidance. She had always thought freedom meant doing whatever you wanted, but now she realized real freedom was knowing why you were created and living in line with that truth. The Muslim woman didn't preach. She didn't push. She simply lived her truth and spoke from a place of sincerity. And it was that sincerity that melted away years of assumptions. She saw how Islam wasn't just a set of rules. It was a way of life, built on wisdom, dignity, and balance. It honored the soul before the body. It valued a woman's mind, her faith, and her purpose more than her appearance. She had never encountered anything like that before. As she walked away, her heart felt heavy, not with confusion, but with reflection. All this time, she had been speaking about Muslim women, but she had never spoken to one. All this time, the world showed her only one version of Islam, the one filled with noise, control, and fear. But now she had seen the other side, the side full of peace, power, and clarity. She didn't convert that day. She didn't make any grand declarations. But something inside her had shifted forever. Her eyes had opened, her heart had softened, and her view of Muslim women would never be the same again. For the first time, she saw them not as silenced, but as truly free. In the end, what began as a question rooted in curiosity led to a journey of discovery that touched her heart. She walked into the conversation believing that Islam suppressed women, but walked away realizing that Islam honors them with dignity, wisdom, and divine purpose. The strength she witnessed was not in rebellion, but in quiet conviction. The peace she felt was not in breaking rules, but in submitting to the one who made them out of mercy and love. She didn't find oppression, she found truth wrapped in modesty, power rooted in humility, and freedom defined by purpose. And perhaps for the first time, she saw a Muslim woman not as someone in need of saving, but as someone who had already found what the world is still searching for. Thank you for watching this powerful journey of perspective and transformation. If this story opened your heart, share it with others. One conversation can change a heart. One moment can lead to truth. One step can bring peace. Stay sincere, stay respectful, and may your journey toward truth always be guided by light. Assalamu alaikum, and see you in the next video.